tragedy. It's more dream, it's more dream. I said all of this tragedy. It's more dream, it's more dream. Till it's over. Now all of this tragedy, it's more dream, it's more dream, yeah. All of this tragedy, it's more dream, it's more dream, and now all of this tragedy, it's more dream, it's more dream. I said all of this tragedy. It's more dream, it's more dream.
Welcome, my friends, and that band was called Blackfire. And if you hear a little bell and rattling in the background, that is my cat, or my roommate's cat, playing with her toy. Yes, hello VCAR, welcome, welcome, welcome. So today we're going to be talking about assimilation, the strategy of enfranchisement. I'll be honest with you, I'm not necessarily too familiar with this concept, but I basically assume that is basically the concept of the idea that Native American people had to assimilate literally with white supremacist culture. And I can relate a little bit with this. I mean, basically, as an autistic person, I had to assimilate with the binary culture, with the divergent culture, and it's just basically, it's just really interesting that like we had to basically live a very, I guess, quote, normal life, so I can understand to some degree, and I can actually even sympathize with it, but I want to know more about it, actually, and I'm sure that, like, it's actually on a much deeper level than I can comprehend in this point, and also, as a trans person, I also want to explore this as well, so, yeah. And I see that you're gender fluid. Welcome aboard. Welcome aboard indeed. Gender fluid solidarity, my friend. Hell yeah. But before we begin, assimilation is a primary thing that basically is was a huge thing we talked about in why reformism is essentially why it's a huge problem. And let me just point out a couple things, right? Like, first of all, remember this thing, right? Just a few things, right? Remember I talked about, like, the line, right? We talked about how big this line was, right? We talked about how huge this line was, right? Now, imagine you're sitting in this line, and then Kamala Harris is like electioneering at you. And like, I mean, granted, you know, say you're like, you know, you're voting for Kamala Harris not because you want to vote for Kamala Harris, but because you actually kind of, you're kind of forced to, and it fucking sucks. And she's like really, really, really making it stink. She's like making it really, really hard for you to like. I mean, she's a cop. Remember, she's a cop. She, in particular, enacted truancy laws for black parents who had children skip school. And that in particular increased the prison rate in San Francisco. Remember that, my friends. Remember that. Anyway, so what we're going to be reading today is Assimilation in the Strategy of Enfranchisement. So I think we should just get straight to the point. And so we should just get straight to it. Bada bing, bada boom. Alright, assimilation, the strategy of enfranchisement. Historic acts of voter suppression appear to contradict the strategy of assimilation. After all, if white settler politicians desired so much for indigenous peoples to become citizens, why then would they actively disenfranchise them at the same time? This is the underlying contradiction of colonialism in the U.S. that has been articulated as the Indian problem, or more bluntly, the question of annihilation or assimilation. As previously mentioned, it wasn't until 1957 that indigenous peoples could vote in every U.S. state. According to Catherine Osborne, some states borrowed the language of the U.S. Constitution, Article 1, Section 2, which bars Indians not taxed from citizenship, and used it to deny voting rights. Legislators in Idaho, Maine, Mississippi, New Mexico, and Washington withheld the franchise from their indigenous citizens because those who were living on reservation land in New Mexico, Utah, and Arizona state, officials argued that living on a reservation meant that Indians were not actually residents of the state, which prevented their political participation. So essentially what that means is that if you didn't own property, you didn't mean anything. And since the state didn't deem a reservation as property, they didn't give you the right to vote. That's what it means, essentially. And that's why we, as anarchists and communists and socialists, seek to abolish private property as a whole. Osborne adds, Article 7, Section 2 of Arizona Constitution says, no person under guardianship, non-compos mentis, or insane, wow, interesting language there, shall be qualified to vote in any election. Arizona lawmakers understood that this as prohibiting Indians from voting because they were allegedly under federal guardianship on their reservations. Interesting there. Very interesting. Because this deems Indians, or in their language Indians, but Native Americans, as as not only insane, but here's the thing: Native Americans have one of the highest, if not the highest, rate of suicide. Straight up, like they have a huge, large, high rate of suicide and illness, and that is because of the non-stop oppression that they go through the state. Early U.S. citizenship policies regarding indigenous peoples was clear. Disenfranchisement would remain until we assimilated and abandoned our tribal statuses. Disenfranchisement was and is a strategy that sets conditions for assimilation. Suppression of political participation has historically been the way the system regulates and maintains itself. White supremacists that controlled the the politics of areas where large indigenous populations feared that they would become a minority subject in their own democratic system. They often subverted enfranchisement in violent ways, but this was never really a threat due to how embedded white supremacy has been in the totality of the U.S. settler colonial project. It is not a settler society. It is not that settler society has capitulated to indigenous interests. It is that indigenous peoples, whether through force of attribution, have been subsumed to the U.S. polity. I think that's the last word. Polity. Perhaps no place is this more clear than through the establishment of tribal councils. 23. The Navajo was created in order to legitimize by the U.S. government. According to a report filed in by the U.S. Commission of Civil Rights, the Tribal Council was created in part so that the oil companies would have some legitimate representatives of the Navajos through whom they could lease reservations land on which oil had been discovered. The Navajo Nation Oil and Gas Company's website states, quote, in 1923, a Navajo tribal government was established primarily for the Bureau of Indian Affairs to approve lease agreements with American oil companies who were eager to begin oil operations on Navajo land. So you can basically reform literally anything and have and like basically get a pass for literally anything. You can wiggle your fucking way into a fucking Navajo fucking reservation just by getting some representatives in a Navajo council, basically. Interesting. That's basically why, like, you know, like that's basically why like account like that's basically why hierarchy is like it's for the most part unjustified. You have to question hierarchy. I mean, like, and you have to question why the hierarchy exists to begin with. You know, and what the purpose of the hierarchy is. And I mean, that's why, like, for example, that's why, like, most of these indigenous activists are actively against, like environmental catastrophes today. And I already see that we're actually going pretty far down the the paragraphs already. I don't know. We might actually finish this article. I'm not entirely sure. We might end early. I'm not entirely sure. We will see. We shall see, my friends. In order to fulfill and maintain colonial domination and exploitation, colonizers, and by the way, yes, Volti, you're right. There are always reactionaries everywhere, in every group of people. You're right. That's a good reminder. In order to fulfill and maintain colonial domination and exploitation, colonizers shape and control the political identity of indigenous peoples. Capitalists facilitate and preyed on the dissolution of indigenous autonomy. The cost of the citizenship has always been the sovereignty of the condition of the citizenship have always been the service of white supremacy. That indigenous peoples were granted the right to vote in 1924, yet our religious practices were outlawed until 1979, is one of the many examples of incongruency of indigenous political identity in the so-called U.S. suffrage movements in the U.S. have fought for equal participation in the political system, but have failed to indict and abolish the systems of oppression that underpin settler colonial society. After decades of organizing, white women celebrated suffrage in 1920, which was granted in part as a reward for their service in World War I. Heteropatriarchy was not dismantled, and black folks were purposefully disregarded in their training. Lucy Parsons, an Afro-Indigenous anarchist, was among many who critiqued suffrage at the time. Parsons wrote in 1905, "Can you blame an anarchist who declares that man-made laws are not sacred? The fact is money and not votes is what rules the people, and capitalists no longer cares to buy." Oh my god, a cat is like right under the desk. Hold on. Oh my gosh. Hello, kitty. How you doing? As a consequence for showing up in my stream, you get many kisses. Anyway, where was I? The capitalists no longer care to buy the voters. They simply buy the servants after they've been elected to serve. The idea that the poor man's vote amounts to anything is the variance delusion. The ballot is only the paper veil that hides the tricks. Black folks suffered decades of white supremacist Jim Crow laws that enforced racial segregation and were designed to suppress their political power. These racist laws didn't end until a powerful mobilization of the civil rights movement in the 1960s. The U.S. government handed down... You want to see the kitty? I'm sorry, hold on. One second. Actually, hold on. Kitty! This is the kitty. It's a shillelagh. I don't think she wants to be on stream, though. Mwah. Anyway, that was it. That was the kitty. Anyway. Anyway. Okay. Where was I? Yeah, don't fucking show up again, kitty. No, I'm just kidding. Silly kitty. Okay. The U.S. government handed down legislation in the 1950s and 60s until, including the 1965 Voting Rights Act, which was critiqued by revolutionary black nationalists such as Malcolm X, the ballot, or the bullet. If you're afraid to use an expression like that, you should get on out of the country. You should get back on the cotton patch. You should get back in the alley. You should get... They get all the blank votes. I'm not saying that word, but I know Malcolm X said it. And after they get it, the blank, Malcolm X said it, gets nothing in return. I'm just going to say Malcolm X was known for saying that word a lot. So just know that. Radical movements have either faced extreme violence and repression, or have systemically assimilated into U.S. political milieu. The U.S. nonprofit industrial complex have operated as an unspoken ally to U.S. imperialism in efforts to of suppression and pacification. See the revolution will not be funded by incite, which is probably an article we should probably read at some point. Perhaps this is the U.S. political machinery method of reducing harm, or impact from effective social and environmental justice movements. if they can't kill or imprison the organizers, they fold them into the bureaucracy or their struggle into businesses. At the end of the day, not everyone can be white supremacists, but everyone can be capitalists. Wow, that's actually very deep, because that reminds me of BreadTube. You know what? At the end of the day, not everyone can be white supremacists, but everyone can be capitalists. BreadTube. BreadTube. That's BreadTube in a nutshell for you guys. Straight up. Like, straight up. Like, everyone is competing. Everyone is literally competing on BreadTube. And, like everyone is always involved in drama. And it's like, when you try to bring up, like, revolutionary action and, like, revolutionary ideas, it's like everyone's trying to tell you not to, not to do it, you know? I'm just like, what the fuck are you doing, you know? Unless you're like EJ or Kamazotz or someone like that, you know? Like, fuck. Oh, by the way, the revolution will not be funded by Insight. It's a book. And if you want to look at it on the channel, it's by Well, thank you, Volty. I really appreciate you highlighting it. Thanks a lot. Thanks a whole lot. I will definitely look at it. I think I'm on not Volty. I think I'm on another Slice's Discord server. So anyway. Oh, we're good. Okay. I think we're good, right? We just connected again. We're good. I'm gonna read that again. I'm gonna read the paragraph again. No, the connection was out for a second. No worries. I'll start the paragraph again. As soon as the political and okay, I'm sorry, everyone. I guess the stream is pausing a lot. I apologize. I don't know what to do about that. I don't know. I guess I'm just gonna have to conclude it. I will say that we should probably wrap up, because maybe it's just like, I don't know. Maybe we should just wrap up now.